Sean "the Fox" O'Malley and Fiona Kelly, two of Dublin's most notorious figures, waged a silent war in the city's shadows, where betrayal, fear, and ambition dictated every move. This is the story of how power, cunning, and ruthless violence shaped Dublin's underworld, and why no one who crossed them ever walked away unscathed. Dublin had always been a city of contrasts, ancient streets lined with history, but beneath the surface, a hidden world of crime and corruption thrived. The early 2000s marked a turning point for the city's underworld, as a new generation of gang leaders began asserting themselves with unprecedented boldness. Among them, Sean "the Fox" O'Malley stood out. He was a man of calculated ambition, known not just for his ruthless efficiency, but for a mind that seemed to anticipate every move of his rivals. In the dimly lit alleys and forgotten warehouses of Dublin, his name carried weight. It was whispered with fear in street corners and behind locked doors, a name that could silence a room even before a confrontation began. Sean was not the type of criminal to rely solely on brute force. His power came from manipulation, intelligence, and an uncanny ability to make the right connections at the right time. Sean's rise was neither sudden nor accidental. He had grown up in one of Dublin's rougher neighborhoods, a place where poverty and violence were as common as the morning mist over the Liffey. From a young age, he learned to navigate a world where survival often depended on quick thinking and unflinching decisiveness. He started small, running minor operations, and learning the art of negotiation and intimidation. But it was his ability to observe human behavior, to understand fear and loyalty, that set him apart. While other gangsters relied on numbers or reputation alone, Sean cultivated an aura of unpredictability. People never knew when he might strike or what he might demand, and that uncertainty gave him power. By 2003, Sean had begun consolidating influence over multiple small gangs scattered throughout Dublin. He offers protection and opportunity, but always with the subtle threat of violence looming in the background. Those who underestimated him often vanished from the streets without explanation, reinforcing the legend that surrounded him. Even law enforcement found it difficult to track his operation. Every warehouse raid or street sweep seemed to miss him by mere hours, as if he had foreseen the movements of the police before they happened. Rumors spread of safe houses hidden behind false walls, of secret tunnels beneath abandoned buildings, and of a network so intricate that even the most seasoned officers struggled to untangle it. Sean's ambition extended beyond petty crime. He envisioned total control over Dublin's underground economy. Everything from drugs and weapons to illicit gambling rings and money laundering. Unlike other gang leaders who were content with local dominance, he saw the city as a chessboard, and each gang, each courier, and each street corner as pieces to be strategically positioned. His reputation was both a weapon and a shield, allowing him to negotiate alliances with rivals while instilling fear that prevented betrayal. Within the shadows, Sean was no ordinary criminal. He was a strategist, a planner, and above all, a man whose patience and cunning ensured that every move furthered his ultimate goal. The people of Dublin sensed the shift in power. Small-time criminals whispered warnings, shopkeepers locked their doors earlier, and even rival gangs began to tread carefully. Sean, "the Fox" O'Malley, was no longer just a figure in the shadows. He was becoming the unseen hand controlling much of the city's criminal activity. His rise marked the beginning of a new era in Dublin's underworld, one where fear, respect, and strategy intertwined, setting the stage for a series of events that would soon plunge the city into chaos and violence. By 2005, Dublin's criminal landscape was shifting more dramatically than ever. Sean, "the Fox" O'Malley, had strengthened his hold over the city's underworld, but every rise in power came with new threats. One of the most formidable of these came in the form of Fiona Kelly, a woman whose reputation in Dublin's gang circles was both feared and respected. Unlike many of her male counterparts, Fiona had built her empire from the ground up, navigating the dangerous streets with sharp intellect and unflinching resolve. She managed one of the city's most lucrative drug networks, a tightly run operation that left little room for error. Her couriers, trusted lieutenants, and hidden storage locations were all part of a system designed to minimize exposure and maximize profit. Fiona's approach was methodical, and it had earned her a position as a powerful force in Dublin's criminal world. The growing tension between Sean and Fiona was not immediate, but inevitable. Sean's expansionist tendencies and reputation for intimidation meant that any network operating independently of his influence could not remain untouched. Dublin's underworld was small, and territorial disputes were as common as streetlights. Rumors of Sean's involvement in a series of mysterious attacks on Fiona's couriers began to circulate. Packages disappeared, trusted messengers vanished, and shipments failed to reach their destinations. Fear spread through Fiona's organization. People whispered about the Fox and his cunning strategies that left no trace of direct involvement. It was a shadow war, fought not with open confrontation but with subtle manipulation and carefully timed strikes designed to destabilize rivals without revealing the source. At the same time, Sean continued consolidating alliances with smaller gangs throughout the city. His strategy was calculated. He offered protection and incentives, but those who failed to comply found themselves swiftly removed from the equation. Dublin's streets were a chessboard, and Sean's moves were precise. Yet Fiona was no ordinary rival. She was a tactician in her own right, quick to adapt and unwilling to be intimidated. The tension between the two networks created a climate of uncertainty, with every interaction between gangs carrying the potential for violent escalation. Civilians began noticing the changes, sensing that the city was becoming a more dangerous place, where loyalty was fragile and betrayal could come from anyone. The fear of betrayal ran deep within Fiona's organization, but she refused to show weakness. She implemented stricter protocols for communication, moved her assets to more secure locations, and began cultivating intelligence networks of her own. She understood that survival depended not just on power, but on foresight and vigilance. Yet even her careful planning could not completely shield her from Sean's reach. Dublin's underworld was evolving into a high-stakes game, where any misstep could prove fatal. Violence, intimidation, and sudden disappearances became daily realities, making it clear that Sean's ambitions and Fiona's resilience were on a collision course. By the end of 2005, the city's criminal hierarchy had begun to shift visibly. Sean, the Fox, had asserted dominance over many smaller players, while Fiona's network, though strong, was under constant threat. The stage was set for a dangerous rivalry, one defined not just by criminal enterprise but by psychological warfare. Dublin's streets were no longer just paths and alleyways. They had become battlegrounds for influence, power, and survival. And in this shadowy world, one wrong move could mean the end, leaving the city to watch as two of its most notorious figures maneuvered in a deadly silent dance of strategy and control. The summer of 2007 brought a new level of intensity to Dublin's underworld, as the silent rivalry between Sean, the Fox O'Malley, and Fiona Kelly escalated into open chaos. Fiona had already suffered the loss of key couriers and the disruption of her supply routes, but the sudden disappearance of her top lieutenant sent shockwaves through her organization. He was a man trusted above all others, responsible for coordinating shipments and maintaining security across multiple neighborhoods. His vanishing without a trace left a gaping hole in her network, and whispers quickly spread that Sean had orchestrated the abduction with surgical precision. Dublin's criminal circles began to speculate. If Sean could eliminate such a central figure without leaving evidence, what could stop him next? Law enforcement, long frustrated by Sean's elusiveness, began receiving a series of anonymous tips about a possible hidden warehouse connected to his operations. The messages were cryptic, providing partial locations and hints at illegal activities, but never enough for a direct raid. Yet investigators persisted, driven by mounting pressure from the public and a growing body of intelligence suggesting that Sean's network was larger and more organized than anyone had realized. When a raid was finally conducted, officers uncovered a treasure trove of criminal activity: firearms of various calibers, stacks of cash in multiple currencies, and meticulous records documenting the movement of drugs and weapons across the city. It was clear that Sean had been running a highly efficient and highly secretive operation. The discovery of the warehouse sent shockwaves, not only through law enforcement, but also through Dublin's underworld. Other gang leaders, previously wary of confrontation with Sean, began to reconsider their positions. Some sought temporary alliances to protect their interests, while others quietly prepared for potential attacks, unsure if they could trust anyone in the volatile network of loyalty and betrayal that dominated the city. Fiona herself was forced to take drastic measures. With her top lieutenant missing and Sean's power seemingly unassailable, she had to rethink her approach entirely. Security was tightened, shipments were rerouted, and intelligence gathering became a full-time priority. Even the most trusted members of her organization felt the weight of constant vigilance. Despite the attention of police and rival gangs, Sean remained a ghost. There were no arrests directly tied to him, and no evidence linked him personally to the attacks on Fiona's network. He continued to orchestrate operations from the shadows, using intermediaries and hidden channels to maintain control. His ability to manipulate information and stay one step ahead earned him an almost mythical reputation among Dublin's criminal circles. Stories of his foresight and precision began circulating, further amplifying the fear and respect surrounding him. By the end of 2007, the balance of power in Dublin had shifted dramatically. Fiona's network, though resilient, was operating under constant threat, while Sean's influence expanded quietly but inexorably. The city itself seemed to change in response, with neighborhoods becoming zones of tension, where loyalty was uncertain and violence could erupt without warning. Dublin's underworld had entered a new, more dangerous phase, a shadowy realm where fear, strategy, and unpredictability dictated the rules, and where Sean the Fox remained the unchallenged architect of chaos. By 2009, Dublin's streets were simmering with violence, the tension between Sean the Fox O'Malley and Fiona Kelly reaching a boiling point. Small skirmishes had begun months earlier, but now they escalated into full-blown ambushes that spread fear across neighborhoods. The city seemed to tremble under the weight of unseen battles fought in alleyways, car parks, and abandoned warehouses. Casualties mounted on both sides, but Sean's gang consistently maintained the upper hand. His meticulous planning and ability to anticipate his rivals' moves ensured that every confrontation ended in his favor. Dublin's law enforcement agencies struggled to keep pace, often arriving only after the chaos had passed, unable to trace the attacks back to him. Sean's tactics were strategic rather than reckless. He employed a network of informants and insiders who provided crucial intelligence on rival activities. This allowed him to strike with precision, often catching his enemies off guard. Fiona's organization, though disciplined and resilient, found itself reacting rather than controlling the situation. Every shipment, every meeting, and every move had to be calculated against the possibility of ambush or betrayal. Dublin's criminal world had transformed into a high-stakes battlefield where one misstep could prove fatal. Ordinary citizens, too, began to notice the increasing violence. Murders, armed confrontations, and mysterious disappearances became more frequent, shaking the sense of safety across the city. The psychological dimension of the turf war was as important as the physical violence. Sean understood that fear could be as powerful a weapon as a gun. He cultivated a reputation for unpredictability, ensuring that even allies never felt completely secure. This constant tension created fractures within rival organizations, as members questioned loyalty and motives. Fiona recognized the threat but refused to show weakness. She tightened her network, repositioned her assets, and reinforced her operations with trusted lieutenants. Despite these efforts, the relentless pressure from Sean's gang forced her to consider unorthodox strategies. During this period, intelligence and counterintelligence became central to survival. Both Sean and Fiona employed spies, intercepted communications, and monitored movements across the city. The streets of Dublin became a chessboard, with each leader moving pieces in a deadly game of strategy. Public spaces, once ordinary and mundane, became scenes of hidden operations, covert meetings, and sudden attacks. The tension was palpable, a constant undercurrent that affected every layer of the city. Neighbors whispered about suspicious activity, drivers altered routes to avoid potential danger zones, and even businesses began taking precautions against gang-related violence. Despite the chaos, Sean remained a ghost. Law enforcement, frustrated by his ability to evade capture, began relying on intelligence gathered from rival gangs, hoping to exploit cracks in his network. Meanwhile, Fiona plotted her own countermoves, determined not to lose control of her territory. The rivalry was no longer just about money or power. It had become a contest of survival, strategy, and influence. By the end of 2009, Dublin's underworld had entered a state of constant tension. Sean's precise, calculated violence had shifted the balance of power, but Fiona's resilience ensured that the conflict would continue. The city's streets had become a battleground where strategy, fear, and ruthlessness dictated every action, and where the outcome of the struggle remained uncertain, teetering on the edge of explosive confrontation. By 2011, Dublin's criminal underworld had grown more dangerous than ever, and Fiona Kelly knew that surviving meant taking bold, calculated risks. After years of being shadowed and harassed by Sean the Fox O'Malley, she decided to strike back in a way that could potentially change the balance of power. Fiona began infiltrating Sean's organization, carefully planting spies and gathering intelligence about his operation. It was a risky move. Any misstep could cost her loyal lieutenants their lives or expose her network to retaliation. But she understood that the city's underworld respected strength, not hesitation. Every contact, every minor transaction, and every conversation was monitored for signs of weakness in Sean's network, and Fiona's team operated with quiet precision, unseen yet deeply aware of the dangers surrounding them. The counterattack reached its peak in a late-night operation outside one of Dublin's busiest nightclubs. Fiona had orchestrated a plan to intercept one of Sean's key shipments, hoping to destabilize his operations and gain leverage. What was intended as a clean, precise maneuver quickly spiraled into chaos. A sudden confrontation erupted, turning the quiet streets into a scene of panic. Gunfire echoed in the alleyways, cars skidded as people fled, and those caught in the crossfire were left shaken and confused. Fiona herself narrowly escaped, but the operation sent a strong message to Sean's organization. She was no longer a passive player. Her audacity demonstrated that she could hit back, and that she understood the vulnerabilities within his carefully constructed empire. The fallout from the nightclub incident was immediate. Within Sean's gang, trust began to erode. Members who had once followed orders without question now questioned loyalty, motives, and competence. Rumors of internal betrayal and failed security protocols spread quickly, adding a layer of tension that Sean had rarely experienced. He had always relied on intimidation and fear to maintain control, but Fiona's audacious strike had exposed cracks in even the most tightly knit parts of his organization. Dublin's streets buzzed with speculation, and smaller gangs and independent criminals watched closely, sensing the shifting power dynamics and calculating how to take advantage. For Fiona, the success of her counterattack did not mean the conflict was over. It revealed both strengths and weaknesses in her network, and she immediately set about reinforcing her security, diversifying her supply chains, and enhancing communication protocols. She had learned that survival required constant vigilance and adaptability. Every ally became a point of scrutiny, every shipment a potential risk, and every street corner a possible trap. The intensity of the rivalry had escalated to the point where both sides were in a constant state of preparation, with the threat of violence always looming just beneath the surface. By the end of 2011, the Dublin underworld was locked in a dangerous stalemate. Sean, the Fox, maintained a reputation of near invincibility, yet the audacity of Fiona's counterattack had made it clear that his empire was not untouchable. The city's criminal landscape had become a battlefield of strategy, loyalty, and calculated risk, where even the most cautious moves could trigger deadly consequences. Dublin's citizens, meanwhile, remained largely unaware of the precise forces at play, yet they felt the tension in the streets, sensing that beneath the city's surface, a relentless and dangerous struggle for control continued without end. By 2013, Sean the Fox O'Malley had become a legend within Dublin's criminal underworld. His ability to evade capture while maintaining control over a sprawling network of gangs and illicit operations had earned him an almost mythical reputation. From stolen goods and drug distribution to underground gambling and protection rackets, Sean's empire seemed untouchable. His name alone inspired fear. Rivals avoided direct confrontation, while allies obeyed without question, knowing that defiance could result in sudden and brutal consequences. Even law enforcement found themselves frustrated and outmaneuvered at every turn. Despite numerous raids and surveillance operations, Sean's meticulous planning and foresight allowed him to remain one step ahead, a ghost orchestrating chaos from the shadows. His influence extended far beyond mere violence or intimidation. Sean was a master strategist, manipulating rivalries and alliances to his advantage. He monitored Dublin's underworld like a chessboard, anticipating moves, exploiting weaknesses, and consolidating power at the most opportune moments. Smaller gangs were brought into his orbit through a combination of fear, bribery, and subtle negotiation. Those who resisted were removed quietly, often disappearing without explanation. Sean's network operated with a level of precision and discipline rarely seen among criminal organizations, earning him respect even from those who despised his methods. His calculated approach allowed him to expand influence without drawing attention to himself, making him nearly untouchable. Yet every empire carries the seeds of its own vulnerability, and Sean's was no exception. A trusted associate, someone who had risen through the ranks and been considered loyal for years, secretly began colluding with law enforcement. Motivated by personal gain and fear of Sean's unpredictable wrath, this betrayal provided authorities with crucial evidence of his operations. Surveillance, wiretaps, and undercover investigations began piecing together the vast web of Sean's criminal network. Suddenly, a man who had seemed untouchable became a target, his carefully constructed empire exposed to scrutiny. The betrayal was subtle but devastating, highlighting a weakness that Sean had never anticipated: the human element. As law enforcement tightened their net, Sean's underworld faced new turbulence. Rival gangs sensed opportunity, recognizing that the legend of his invincibility had cracks. Tensions within his own organization grew as members questioned loyalty and motives. For the first time, Sean encountered resistance not only from external forces but from within his ranks. Allies who had once followed orders without hesitation began to act cautiously, unsure of who could be trusted. The Dublin streets, once firmly under his influence, became unpredictable zones of uncertainty. By the end of 2013, the balance of power in Dublin's underworld was shifting. Sean, the Fox, remained a figure of fear and respect, but the betrayal had exposed vulnerabilities that could no longer be ignored. The stage was set for a dramatic confrontation between law enforcement, rival gangs, and Sean himself. The city watched silently, unaware of the intricate moves and countermoves shaping the future of its criminal landscape. The legend of Sean, while formidable, was now under threat, proving that even the most carefully constructed empires can crumble when trust is broken and enemies close in from every direction. The fall of Sean, the Fox O'Malley, came as suddenly as it had been anticipated. In a meticulous, coordinated operation, law enforcement struck late one night, surrounding one of his safe houses in a quiet, unassuming neighborhood of Dublin. For years Sean had managed to evade capture through cunning, planning, and the loyalty or fear of those around him. But the betrayal from within his inner circle, combined with months of intelligence gathering, finally allowed authorities to close in. Officers moved swiftly, breaching doors, securing exits, and ensuring that no one could escape. The man who had once controlled vast networks of criminals, weapons, and illicit goods now found himself cornered, facing the consequences of a life built on manipulation and fear. The arrest sent shockwaves through Dublin's underworld. News of Sean's capture spread quickly, whispered in the streets and shouted across bars and clubs, as both allies and rivals grappled with the reality that the city's most notorious figure was now in custody. His empire, long thought untouchable, was suddenly vulnerable. Members of his gang were left scrambling, uncertain of how to protect themselves or where to turn. Rival gangs saw an opportunity, some moving quickly to claim territory or seize assets that had once been under Sean's control. Even within law enforcement, there was a mix of triumph and caution, knowing that dismantling the remnants of Sean's operations would require careful planning to avoid further bloodshed. The investigation that followed revealed startling details about the extent of Sean's criminal network. Hidden warehouses stocked with firearms, large sums of cash in multiple currencies, and meticulously maintained records of illicit transactions came to light. The evidence painted a picture of a man who had built a highly organized and sophisticated operation, combining brute force with careful strategic planning. Investigators uncovered not only his involvement in drug trafficking and weapons smuggling, but also links to disappearances and acts of violence that had plagued Dublin for years. The scale of his activities shocked even seasoned officers, confirming the city had been living under the shadow of a criminal mastermind. Fiona Kelly, Sean's longtime rival, reacted with calculated calm. While she had suffered under Sean's dominance for years, his arrest allowed her to consolidate her influence over certain parts of the underworld. Yet she remained cautious, fully aware that the removal of one powerful figure often triggers new conflicts. Dublin's criminal landscape had shifted, but it was far from stable. Power vacuums emerged, alliances were tested, and new players began asserting themselves, each attempting to claim a piece of the fractured network Sean had left behind. For the city itself, Sean's arrest marked the end of an era, but not the end of fear. His reign had left scars, disrupted communities, lives lost, and a pervasive sense of danger that lingered even after he was imprisoned. Yet it also provided insight into the structure and operations of Dublin's criminal underworld, giving law enforcement a blueprint for dismantling other networks. Sean "the Fox" O'Malley, once untouchable, had fallen, but the lessons of his cunning and ruthlessness would echo in Dublin for years to come, reminding all who watched that in the city's shadows, power is fleeting, and even the most legendary figures are not invincible. Years after Sean "the Fox" O'Malley's fall, Dublin's underworld remained a city of shadows and whispers. His capture had dismantled a vast criminal empire, yet the void he left did not bring peace. Instead, it created a shifting landscape where new players and old rivals scrambled for power, each attempting to claim territory and influence in a world where loyalty was fragile and danger constant. Fiona Kelly, once Sean's most persistent adversary, had consolidated her control over portions of the city, but she too understood that dominance in Dublin's criminal world was temporary. Every victory carried the risk of retaliation, every alliance a potential betrayal, and every decision a gamble with life or death stakes. The lessons of Sean's reign lingered. His methods had been precise, his intelligence network extensive, and his ability to manipulate human behavior unmatched. Even in prison, his legend influenced the streets. Smaller gangs cited his strategies as models, either to emulate or to avoid. Law enforcement, while bolstered by the evidence uncovered during his arrest, continued to face the challenge of predicting moves in a world built on secrecy and fear. Dublin's citizens, meanwhile, remained largely unaware of the complex games unfolding in alleyways and abandoned buildings, though they could feel the subtle tension in the air. Mysterious disappearances, sudden acts of violence, and unspoken threats continued to shape the daily lives of those living near contested neighborhoods. New figures began rising, eager to fill the gap left by Sean. Some were ruthless opportunists, relying on intimidation and brute force to assert authority. Others were strategic thinkers, studying past empires to avoid mistakes and consolidate power quietly. Fiona, now more cautious than ever, watched these developments carefully, understanding that surviving as the dominant force required constant vigilance. She strengthened her network, diversified her operations, and cultivated a reputation that balanced fear with respect, ensuring that those around her knew the consequences of disloyalty. Dublin's criminal environment had evolved from chaotic skirmishes to a sophisticated game of strategy, where knowledge and foresight were as lethal as weapons. Despite the changes, the cycle of crime persisted. Law enforcement made arrests and disrupted operations. But for every leader removed, another emerged, determined to claim a place in the underworld hierarchy. Dublin's streets, familiar yet unpredictable, continued to serve as the stage for this endless struggle. The memory of Sean the Fox O'Malley remained a cautionary tale for all who sought power. His rise and fall highlighted both the possibilities and limits of influence in a world dictated by fear, cunning, and survival instincts. Ultimately, Dublin's underworld is a realm where permanence is an illusion. The city itself seems to harbor an unspoken rule. Power is fleeting, alliances are fragile, and every shadow may conceal a threat. The stories of Sean, Fiona, and those who came before and after them are intertwined, forming a complex tapestry of ambition, betrayal, and strategy. While the faces may change, the patterns endure. In the heart of Dublin, danger never truly sleeps, and the echoes of past empires remind all who watch that control is never absolute, and survival depends on both skill and luck. The underworld moves in shadows, but its influence touches every corner of the city, a persistent reminder that in this world, the game never ends, and the stakes are always life and death.